There's a lot of good photographers in the world doing crazy
Oh,
stuff.
not on YouTube, no.
No, no.
No, a lot of people just kind of sit there and talk about lenses and they're not actually good photographers. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting that we're actually two working good photographers that are on YouTube. So we're
Oh,
very
yes,
rare.
that's true.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about focal lengths. So
Yeah, let's talk about focal lengths. Focal lengths. So, like, as a
and
prime photographer,
yeah,
I would
prime, I was
say
about to say.
there's a few primes that you might specifically enjoy, but like there's a lot of different focal lengths in the range that you could get that
Yeah, I'd
offer
say
a whole lot of different
we've
stuff.
tried out just about every single focal length. I mean, I've done like
Yeah.
everything from 24 to 200 and the
And more, yeah.
primes, yeah.
And
And we're
more,
not really zoom shooters, so let's
mostly primes, yeah.
Yeah.
Even
So-
wider than that, though. I think the widest, well, maybe a 12 millimeter.
Okay.
They get pretty
So-
wide. That's about as wide as I shot, but they get wider than that. There's like maybe a 7.5 might be about as wide as.
So you're shooting 12 millimeters, like everything's in the frame. What are you looking for if you're at?
Yeah, if you're shooting at like that ultra wide, you have to get like your composition has to be excellent. You have to walk to the perfect spot where because everything's in frame. Like there's no cheating there. You have to get the composition perfect.
Yeah, you can't simplify the frame. You can't just break it down.
Right.
And,
Exactly.
get an artsy picture of a hand. You can't use
You
the
gotta,
beginner photographer tip that everybody goes by when they first start out, which is get closer, basically.
yeah, with that one, you
There's
could get closer, but the world's everywhere. So
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot of
it's a lot.
information at 12 millimeters.
And there's a lot of distortion, a lot. Even with like lenses that are really well managed, like Zeiss has some really good lenses that do distortion really well, but they're still like it's just inherent to a really wide angle lens.
Yeah,
It's
so
going to be kind of
let's
round,
just kind
and
of
it's going to give you.
yeah. So there's like 12 millimeters sometimes, or 11. I know Canon has that 11. And
Yeah, so it's just like basically an ultra wide, which is basically
yeah.
anything
Let's just
from
cover
like
all this in one. So ultra wide. So
Yeah, let's call
11
ultra-wide.
millimeters, 15 millimeters, 18 millimeters. So
yeah, maybe some companies have like maybe a 21 might be an ultra wide, but that's kind of like right in between like a wide and ultra wide. I think that's kind of where you're blurring the lines.
yeah,
But usually you would use something like that for I don't know astrophotography if you're trying to get like epic landscape shots, or maybe if you were like paparazzi and you wanted to stand in front of everybody else.
Yeah,
I don't know what else you'd really do with that.
I'm not daring enough to be shooting at like 11 millimeters, 15 millimeters. 18.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit with like your kind of aesthetic or my kind of aesthetic. That's more of like a portraiture standpoint. But there's people that would definitely use ultra wide for some functions.
Yeah, but yeah, be very careful with distortion on the edges there, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I ever shoot like a person on an ultra wide kind of lens, I'll try to get them as center in the frame as I can to kind of stop
I think
face warping
that's
and
part
stuff.
of the reason I may not be drawn towards anything wider than 24, 20. My lens is actually 25, but it's kind of just around
Yeah,
24
that kind of
is the standard.
24, yeah.
Yeah, just because I like to frame people at the very bottom of the frame, and a lot of times there's a lot of information in the image that if you center them up, then there's nothing really interesting on the ground, like on the bottom of the frame, I guess.
Right.
So
Yeah, if you're going for that ultra wide shot.
yeah. So if I'm
But
doing
those
like a
aren't
wide
as
shot,
bad though, because like then you could still have the person in the middle. If they got warped a little, it wouldn't be as bad. But I feel like if you're getting like a head and shoulders shot with something like that, you have to get really close. And if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna definitely try to center them in the frame. But if I'm trying to make more like a landscape kind of like environmental portrait, yeah, I'm with you. Like definitely would center them up in the center, but more towards the bottom.
yeah. So the trick to that is finding. Since there's so much distortion on the bottom of the frame, is you have to actually, if you're trying to photograph a person in there, then you got to make sure that you actually have good like leading lines in the
Right.
on the bottom.
Yeah,
of the
something
image.
interesting leading you up to it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it could be like trees, or it could be like a path, or it's just some kind of leading line that'll get you into that photo, for sure.
Yeah,
So that's the ultra wide. We don't really use those much. The other time I would say I use ultra wides is maybe you might use it a lot in architecture photography. I know like when I have an ultra wide lens, I'll use it a lot in wedding photography, like to show the venue or to show the church, or maybe like later in the night to show dancing pictures of lots of people or something.
Yeah, I think anything wide is pretty interesting on the dance floor. So if you're trying to convey chaos, then you're inducing more information into the frame. You're getting crazier distortion. You're getting a more radical sort of out of what your eye would normally see.
And if you have like a lot of repeating patterns, like let's say a dance floor full of people, it just looks really massive and epic and interesting.
Yeah. So, let's go over to 24. So I shoot.
So like maybe like what you would call wide, like 24 to 35, maybe.
Well, yeah. I think 24 and 35 are are different enough to talk about them separately. But like, yeah,
but
like,
those are like that's generally what's considered the regular wide angle.
Yeah, for sure.
Perspective, I think.
Yeah, I do like 25. So when I was starting out, I definitely did 35, but I've been finding 25 like pretty interesting. So with a lot of these newer 25, 24, 25 lenses, my specific lens is the baddest 25. But with these newer ones, there's not as much distortion around the edges, and so you can get away.
Especially with Zeiss. Zeiss really manages that stuff well.
Yeah, and I've also shot the Canon 24mm Mark I for a bit too, and it was a lot less forgiving.
That lens wasn't particularly great.
Yeah.
The coatings weren't as good on it.
Yeah. So with these older 24s, it was more difficult to shoot with them all day, just because they lost sharpness.
Get a lot of distortion and lots and lots of edge fall off.
Yeah, lots of edge fall off, distortion, and so I've been enjoying it. So one thing I've noticed is I'm able to, when I'm doing portraits, I'm able to have people walk a little bit more, and I can be closer to them. I can instruct more and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can really be up in people's face at 25, 24. 35.
Yeah, so you can work a little bit closer, all that good stuff. But
I also really like that kind of perspective, because I feel like you can, like, sometimes you're in a tight spot, like getting reading rooms, or you're in the city and you want to show like really tall skyscrapers or something. But you don't want it like that ultra wide bulbous looking shot. I feel like 24 is so good for those kinds of pictures. I use that kind of look a lot when I have that lens at my disposal, for sure.
Yeah, I think of 35mm as like Helvetica, basically. Like it's kind of just like a blank slate.
I mean, everybody's used 35 at some point in their lives. Like, it's just so built in.
Yeah, 35 is just like it's normal. Like if I wanted to shoot and I didn't want the focus to be on what focal length I was shooting, I would shoot 35, 85, or just in the middle with one lens with 50. So those are all.
No, even if I was just going to do one, I might just still pick 35. Like 35, you can just do everything with.
Yeah,
there's really nothing that's outside of your realm with 35.
Yeah. Let's go over to 35 now. So at 35, you basically can shoot it, and it's not like a wild perspective. It's not too compressed.
Yeah, it's more similar to what you're used to seeing out of your own eyes, but maybe not perfect. But it's not so jarring that people look stretched or look extra different than they do.
Yeah, I think 35 is a great focal length to start on, and just kind of experiment with it. And it's
you shoot that all day.
Yeah, and it's a little bit less boring than 50. I've always found 50mm to be like a little bit boring, but.
Yeah, I like 50 too. I just feel like with 50, oftentimes you're a little too zoomed in to get the action. I mean, if you're going to do a lot of portraits, though, and stuff like that, and you're going to do more like general photography as a walk around, I still prefer a 35. I just feel like 35 really just gives me it's still kind of a flat perspective, so things don't get so round, so everything looks pretty natural, especially if I do environmental portraits. I do a lot of environmental portraits at 35. I'd say more so even than the 24, for sure. I feel like 35 is pretty much always on one of my cameras.
Yeah. 50mm, did you start out on 50mm or?
Yeah, the first prime I ever had was a 50 for sure.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, I mean, 50's fantastic. Like, I own a bunch of 50s still. I have 1, 2, 3, I have 4 50mm lenses.
Yeah, I find I don't have as many lenses, and I find that 50mm is just maybe a little bit too boring for me. So I do like.
What is it that's boring about the 50mm to you?
To me?
Yeah, what makes it boring? I don't know. I think you can make that. I've made some pictures that I'm absolutely in love with at 50.
Well, so it's not wide enough to make an interesting picture sometimes. So you can't get as much information in there. Sure. And so if you're in an indoor space, then it's kind of like
tight.
Tight.
Yeah,
right?
It's tight for sure.
Yeah, and I suppose I would rather shoot like 85 because it's you can get more bokeh, it's more compressed, you can simplify the frame.
And it's really exacting. Like those pictures are the 85 pictures, and these pictures aren't. Like you can tell which ones came out of the 85 without having to look at EXIF data or really think about it too much. Like 85 is very pronounced.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess I just prefer something a little bit more pronounced, like a 35 or a 24, and then on the other end, just a 85. So I wanted to look a little bit more stylized than 50, but not too much.
And because so many people are used to seeing 50 images, because so many 50 images have been shot over the course of history, like when you make something at 35 or 85, that's a little different.
Yeah.
It can give it a more unique feel, and it can look newer and different. So that definitely, I understand what you're saying from that perspective. Like it's just been used a lot. It's kind of like Helvetica.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just like it's the standard. Everybody's used to 50. But I mean, you can do it all on a 50. If I had to shoot a wedding on a 50, I mean, it'd be tricky, but I could do it. I think.
Yeah, I shot my first wedding on a 50 millimeter.
Just
so.
a 50.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays, like now that you've done photography for so many years.
You develop preferences.
Yeah, you have
over
preferences.
Time.
So now thinking about doing it on a 50, I'm like, I could, but it wouldn't be quite as good as if I just used these other things that I have. So like, I don't really.
I feel like
that as much anymore, I guess.
Like you kind of go through phases as a photographer too. So you're gonna shoot 50 for 2 years. And,
especially like if your brand comes out with a rockin' 50. All of a sudden, that has something really special about it that you really like. Like, I don't know, a 50 f1 Fuji. You might be like, oh man, I want to shoot this thing all the time, but I'm not normally a 50 person.
Yeah, like if you if you see a new lens coming out, then you probably want to try it out for sure. Yeah,
if it's in your wheelhouse. But so anyway, so that's the 50. It's kind of the standard. We're all kind of accustomed to that.
Yeah, it's a standard, and as you get better as a photographer, then I mean, at least for me, the way it worked was, for my widest lens, it was 50, and then I was like, oh, this is boring. And then 35, I'm gonna put more stuff into the frame. It's more challenging. You have to watch everything a little bit more, and then I went to 24, 25. After that.
I definitely feel like the 24 is like you have to be a lot more aware of those things. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And then so like moving on from the normal lenses, I guess we're starting in like short telephoto. So I guess the start of telephoto would be an 85 in most people's mind, maybe a 75, 85.
Yeah,
somewhere around there.
Yeah, 85 is beautiful.
85 is kind of the standard.
There's not too much distortion or anything, and
it gives you a really flat look. Sure.
You can do lots of bokeh.
Tons of compression. I feel like I love the compression, like a lot more than the 50.
Yeah, and most 85 lenses, they must be easy to make because there's not too much distortion on the edges or whatnot, and there's not like too much corner fall off, or you don't lose too much sharpness.
And I think that really also another thing is that because we're so accustomed to having very large 85 millimeter lenses, they can make them kind of bigger, which makes it kind of easier to stuff stuff into them. Because we're used to buying a big 85 millimeter lens. I mean, you ever had a small 85 millimeter lens except for now?
No. My 85 is quite a bit lighter.
Yes. I mean, think of some of the 85s in the past, like they're ginormous, and so you're just kind of used to that. And now that they're smaller,
so the reason I need an 85 in my kit is because if I show up somewhere and I look at it and I'm like, how is this gonna work?
Sometimes you get to scenes that aren't as beautiful as you had in mind, and you're like, I gotta try to make this still.
Yeah, so I think of 85 as my
special magic weapon.
Yeah, my special magic weapon. So go down to one. If I show up, I'm like, how am I going to make this work?
This is
the trick is 1.8, and then
get that thing open.
Yeah,
and try to get some space between stuff behind them.
Yeah, for sure. So if you ever show up and there's a lot of clutter in the background of like an aisle shot or something, I'm talking wedding photos, then I think the move is to go 85 most of the time and 1.8, and then and just like,
or 1.2 if you got it. That's what I'll usually do. I'll go to 1.2.
I guess the problem with the old Canon lens I had at 85 when I had a 1.2 is that it couldn't grab focus very well at 1.2.
That one at 1.2.
Yeah, so I was always shooting that one.
The 56 1.2 you can shoot at 1.2 all day, but it's not quite. Anyway, so like the 85 I think is like kind of a standard, like renowned as the portrait lens. Like everyone will tell you that is the de facto portrait lens.
it's your moneymaker as a photographer.
If you're gonna take pictures of people, you basically have to have an 85. Like I have to have an 85.
Yeah, if you're doing like senior portraits or who knows what else,
lifestyle stuff, or you're doing like even if you're doing like fashion modelly stuff, you gotta have an 85.
Yeah, you gotta have it to make money. I mean, in my book,
gotta have it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really specialized and it's like just like lit headshots or something, then you're probably gonna want to.
Maybe you could do 100 or a 200 or a 200. Yeah, you could probably get away with something else, but like.
Weddings,
you gotta
portraits,
have an 85 if you're taking
lifestyle.
Pictures of people a lot and model stuff, any of that kind of stuff, any kids, families, any of that stuff. If you're shooting at people, I feel like you gotta have an 85.
Yeah, for sure.
The next one I'd say in the line that you usually see lots 100, and I think that 100 usually becomes a macro lens because of something about the distance of 100 millimeters makes a good macro lens. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know about that. I just know that every 100 millimeter lens I've had has had some sort of macro attached to it, from Canon to Zeiss to Fuji. They all have some sort of.
Yeah, there's one Canon that isn't an L lens that was 100. That was a good lens.
Yeah, and it was a macro too.
Oh, it was macro?
Oh, the F2. Yeah.
The F2.
Yeah, no,
I
that
can
was
only
just a
think of
portrait lens.
yeah, I can only think of one that was.
Yeah, that was one. That's good.
Yeah,
But,
I guess.
But generally, 100
yeah.
is assumed as either a portrait lens or a macro kind of lens.
Yeah, Sigma came out with 105, and Nikon did like
F1.4. Those are
F1.4.
more portrait, though. I don't think they have macro capability.
Yeah, those are all portrait lenses
Right.
too. But yeah, if you're looking into some of the newer 100mm portrait lenses, then you can get massive bokeh. I think it's probably overkill. You don't need to be shooting headshots at 1.4.
Yeah,
which a lot of the new 100s are at 1.4.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I agree that most 100s before recent times were all macro lenses. And yeah, do you use I don't really use macro lenses, but
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
We use the macro lenses for the wedding day details, like rings and close-ups of flowers, stuff like that. But
Yeah.
like, occasionally it'll come along with us for the portrait session, but only because we already have an 85 out there and a 50 out there and a 35 out there. You know what I mean? So it's just
Yeah.
like one more lens to have, just to get maybe one or two perspective shots on. But generally, I would prefer an 85 over 100 if I'm going to be doing portraits. But I
Yeah.
feel like 100, if you're not doing macros, is you're mostly going to use it for portraits. You might
Yeah.
use it for some landscape stuff, but
yeah,
animal stuff maybe, bugs,
yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then the next one I think in the line that most people get is the 135, and I always own a 135. I think 135 is super awesome. I love that kind of whimsical look it makes, and the tons of compression, and there's just so much bokeh out of it. You just have to realize that your subjects are going to be far away from you. It's hard to communicate with your subjects at 135.
Yeah. So it's going to be a little bit more compressed than the 85, and a lot of the lens makers make really good 135. So for whatever
Yeah.
reason, I think it's an easy focal length for.
Yeah, because they're generally pretty inexpensive too.
Yeah.
But like they seem to be awesome. Like, and the F2
Yeah.
seems to be pretty easy
Yeah,
to make.
if you need more reach than 85, I mean 135 is a great option too.
I think some other people that use 135s are some guys that might do portrait stuff, and I think a lot of like indoor sports or outdoor sports 135.
Yeah, if they
is-
need like an F2. Then
Yeah, because you can make a 135 at a really fast aperture. So like if you're doing indoor sports, that might be more advantageous than a zoom because you can get really fast.
yeah.
So I feel like that's kind of mostly what 135s get used for. I'm sure there's landscape and travel guys that use it too, but I would imagine it's mostly used for portrait and outdoor
sports, yes. Anything like low light. And yeah, F2 135. I know that Canon one that I used to own was really great if I had to go work a church wedding. I don't do that too much
Yeah,
nowadays.
churches,
But
they're good for churches.
yeah, you can go to F2 and get some nice bokeh.
Yeah, sometimes
and,
you can be up on the balcony in the church or
Yeah,
something and just
and
knocking
when
down shots.
when I first started wedding photography, I was a lot of times I was nervous to get close enough to shoot with an 85 at a ceremony, so a 135 came in very, very handy when I was like first starting. But then over time, I didn't get quite.
It doesn't get as much use, I feel like, for wedding photography because it's just not as practical as some of the shorter focal distances. And like when you're inside, like you have, I mean, I think minimum focus distance on most of them is like 5 or 6 feet. Like you have to have a good amount of space.
You don't want to bring this thing to like a engagement session sometimes. I mean, you might get a couple of pictures with it, but generally, like you're going to use an 85 or a 35 or a 50 a lot more. Yeah,
something like that.
But yeah, some people love the compression of 135. I'm not personally one of those people, but
I do. Yeah, I'm one of those people, and I take it with me all the time when I'm doing like engagement sessions up in the mountains. And rarely do I use it on wedding days though, unless something happened to maybe my 85.
Yeah, I think a great way to look at it, look at like all these focal lengths we've been discussing, is to start at 50 and then say this is pretty unstylized, and then like the wider you go, the more stylized it's going to be. And
yeah, do you want more? Do you want to see more? Or do you want to see?
Do you want more compression?
Do you want it closer and you want to get more bokeh and try to get more of a
less compression? Do you
want more than one?
Yeah, for sure.
I have all these lenses we've been talking about in all these focal distances, and like sometimes you just want a specific one because there's a difference in these focal distances other than just the use cases that we talk about, but also the compression and how it brings things closer or further from the lens, depending on what focal distance you use and how it narrows down the field of view. Like there's a lot of other things other than just these things that you want to consider. And sometimes you can take one of these lenses that's specifically ultra wide that's always been made for this and use it for a different application and create something totally unique and new and different. So like sometimes I'll try to cross the boundaries with a focal distance,
Yeah, for sure. I think when you first get into photography, you might look at like a 24 and be like, oh, this is like what I want for landscapes. But then as you experiment more, you might actually say, oh, I really love details of landscapes. I like to
Yeah, I
get
want to
in
get a
there
little
close.
closer
I
too.
like the compression that makes the mountains look like they're closer to me.
Or
at
maybe
like
what you realize,
135.
like me, is you're like, I like all of these things, and I want to try to bring all these lenses and make all these different looks so that I have more of a cohesive portfolio of that shoot for me. Like for me, that's how I do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's,
for
it's
sure.
good to consider different focal distances and figure out which ones you like the most that really work for you, but also know that there's other ones out there that maybe you've never tried that you might want to make use of.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one we're going to talk about is 200. I've
Oh,
shot
we didn't talk about the old 200.
yeah, I had this.
the
Yeah.
bokeh barrel. That was
Yeah.
called the bokeh pipe.
Yeah,
I've heard
yeah.
that thing called all sorts of crazy things.
When I was going through all the Canon lenses, I went through every single prime and 24 to 135, and I said to myself, I'm bored. I want something different.
Man, that 200 makes so much
Yeah.
bokeh. It is like
Yeah,
insane.
So what I did was I rented a 200 millimeter f2, the newest version, and I did a portrait shoot with it, and I was just excited about it. So
That weighs like 15 pounds. It has a handle on it, right?
I don't geek out on gear as much anymore. But when you're like kind of in that like gear phase where you're trying out everything, then
And if you're really big and strong, like for me that would be very hard. I'm not nearly as big and strong as you. So for me, like having a 15-pound f2 200 millimeter lens just wasn't in the game.
But
at
yeah,
all.
I don't really know what to say about it. It was fun to experiment with, so I had that for like a week. Have you ever shot 200 for headshots? I mean, it's a great headshot
Well, I used
lens.
to have the 200 2.8, which is a good lens, but it wasn't the f2. And I would use that sometimes on engagement sessions, like just to make like a really cool whimsical picture. But in all honesty, it's just not very practical to use. And I feel like if you have like a lens that's like 200 millimeters or
it's so
300
stylized.
or 400 or 500,
there's so
like
much
nobody's really using it. So like your pictures look really unique and different. But also like more from the everyday perspective, I think that lens mostly is used by like professional sports users typically, right? Like that's like Sports Illustrated guys on the side of those sidelines and stuff that are using that kind of distance lens with that kind of fast aperture.
Yeah, for sure.
So you kind of were really creative in that you took it and applied it to something that really wasn't ever.
I don't know if I was creative. I think I was just like geeking out on gear and being like, oh, I gotta try this. But
well, no, you were still creative and to take the 200 and like kind of do that. But I mean, some people use the 70 and 200, which they swear by the 200.
But the 200s are so much bigger than like a 135 or an 85. And
way bigger.
Yeah, I think you'll get better pictures if your kit's just lighter.
In all honesty, I have on my Fuji kit, because I shoot the Fuji crop sensors, and I have a Canon 135 f2 lens, and converted to that, it's like a 200 millimeter focal distance, and it's small, and I can carry it around, and it gives you kind of an artsy look, but like you wouldn't really use it too much for your everyday lens. So like if that was your favorite lens, it would really limit where you could do your photography sessions.
Yeah,
you'd have to have a lot of open space.
Yeah, let's give some recs. So, if you're a beginner, what's the first lens that you should buy?
You should probably get a 50 or a 35, in my opinion.
Yeah,
there's a lot of cameras that come built with 35s or 50s fixed on them.
I'd say just buy a 50. Don't buy a zoom lens. You're gonna be
Well, you could buy a zoom lens if you knew that you were only going to use the zoom lens to figure out which primes you wanted to buy. Like, because if you went to Lightroom and you shot a lot of pictures with a 24-70, you could see what focal distance you shot it at. So if most of your pictures are ending up at around 48 or 50 or something, then you should probably sell that zoom lens and get yourself a prime.
Maybe that's great advice too. I've never thought about it that way. But maybe just buy a zoom lens and then look at the data in Lightroom and be like,
just run around and use it a lot and figure out what you like.
Yeah, that'd be a way to save a lot of money actually.
I used to do that all the time with my third shooters that would shoot zoom lenses, and I'd be like, dude, you should get one of these lenses because almost everything you shot was at 35 yesterday.
What about somebody who just wants to take really great photos of like their family?
Again, I think 35, because a 35 can give you enough perspective where you can still get a lot of indoor shots and outdoor shots, and you're not, you know what I mean?
And it's not too stylized like a 24.
Yeah, and it's not so stylized, and it's also like easier to shoot. Like you said, like the 35 is pretty normal looking, so you can't make as many photography mistakes, so to speak, with it.
What if I live in LA and I want to become a headshot photographer? What lens?
You're probably gonna get either a 85 or a 135 or maybe a 100, something in there. A lot of photographers that do the headshot only will usually shoot a 70 to 200. just because of the versatility of it. But I would imagine that most of them probably lock it in at one focal distance.
If you're a street photographer, go 35. So
yeah, there's a lot of the old school photographers in the street were all about the 50s, but nowadays everybody's 35-24. It seems. Not too many people do the 50 thing anymore.
Yeah, people definitely go 35 or 50 usually. So
I mean, you can just get so much more scene if you're doing 35.
If I was starting out in street photography, I would just get a 35 because you can add more to your frame. You're gonna have more just options for compositions.
It also depends on like how brave you are. Like if you're doing street photography and you got a wide angle lens, you're gonna have to get up closer to people, and that might not be as comfortable for you as maybe a 50.
Oh, for sure. But if you want to become a street photographer, you kind of have to do that.
You're probably eventually you're probably gonna have to jump in there.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other? If you're a wedding photographer, I mean, I did my first one on a 50 millimeter, so I got away with it somehow. You just have to get closer and stuff. So
I feel like the 35-85 or the 24-85 is kind of the bread and butter for that one.
It's tough to say because like ideally you'd want to start out with 2 lenses in wedding photography if you were going to photograph it. But if I just had one, I guess I would go 50. I guess I'd go.
You go 50. I go 35.
Yeah.
I go 35. I just feel like there's so many situations where I just need a little more. And 50, I like 50. Don't get me wrong. I have a lot of 50 millimeter lenses, and I probably own 20 of them in my life. Mm-hmm. But it's just not as practical. It's just too tight sometimes.
I have the luxury of owning 2 lenses, so either 24 or 35 for my wide angle.
Yeah, definitely
would be my preference. But if I only had one, I guess I'd go 50 just because. You kind of need, like, I feel like you might need a little bit more reach than.
And if you were like doing like portraits, or maybe you were doing like model shoots or something like that, you'd pretty much want an 85. I feel like 85 is. I mean, that's if you were only going to have one lens and one focal distance, that would be the one to buy, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. How many lenses do you think is ideal for a kit? I'm guessing 13.
Man, it depends on who you are, right?
Yeah, it can vary a lot.
It can vary. Sometimes I've had over 100, and that's I guess was enough, but it was way overkill. But like, I mean, if you're just like a shoot it on the weekend with your family kind of guy, you probably just need one.
Yeah.
But if you're running a business, you probably need a couple. I always feel like for me, I need at least 2 and at least 1 backup.
Yeah, for sure.
So
everybody's a little bit different. So.
But yeah, everybody's got a different preference. And like some people like to have all the range, and some people just like to have 1 or 2.
Yeah. Well, this was photo footage on, what were we talking about? Focal lengths.
Focal lengths, yeah.
Yeah, you can check me out on Instagram at Nick Sparks Photography. I do have a second YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/Nick Sparks. And so you can also see some more stuff there. I don't post very much, but go ahead if you want to. You can find Matt Irving on Instagram at Matt Irving Photography. He's going to start a YouTube channel at some point, possibly. So we'll see if that ever happens. But until then, you're on photo footage, and this was our podcast. So like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe.